Now look, this dude's nearly 80 years old. He damn near killed himself getting into a garbage truck.
There are surely millions of conflicted Americans who are sympathetic to the Democrats' closing argument that Donald Trump is the risk to our national civic health we're reluctant to take.
Before he gave up and quit, he quit like a little loser. He quit.
We don't have to adjudicate the precise semantics about whether he meets the literal definition of fascist.
Do you think Donald Trump is a fascist?
Yes, I do.
We've heard and seen enough of him to recoil at the thought of 4 more years.
Now the fate of our nation is in your hands.
We are conflicted, however, because of this simple, enraging thought about the Democrats themselves. Are we really going to let them get away with exploiting that unease, using our doubts and manipulating our angst to validate retrospectively the damage they've wrought in the past 4 years?
My values have not changed.
And to approve proactively what they might do in the next 4?
Would you have done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years?
There is not a thing that comes to mind.
What all this amounts to is nothing less than an abuse of the voters' scruples, an exploitation of the yearning many have for just a hint of normalcy. Don't doubt that the Democrats fully intend to repurpose that desire into another sweeping mandate for their divisive and destructive ideology.
I think we should eliminate the filibuster for Roe.
That's the reason, it seems, that enough Americans are ready to take their chances on another term for Mr. Trump. They want to tell the Democrats, you don't get to do that.
Donald Trump is increasingly unhinged and unstable.
You don't get to drive the country ever further into your new progressive dystopia, deepening our divisions and sapping our strength, and then turn around and say to the voters, sorry, but it's us or Hitler.
This is the kind of outrageous rhetoric that has resulted in 2 assassination attempts.
4 years ago, the former president was beaten.
We're going to walk down to the Capitol.
His disgraceful behaviour in his final 2 months in office was, if not constitutionally disbarring, at least politically disqualifying.
The chair declares the joint session dissolved.
That should have been the end of him politically, yet his fortunes have revived, not because of some genius work of rehabilitation on his or his supporters' part, but entirely because of his Democratic opponents' arrogance, overreach, and ineptitude.
Ask yourself, do I look like a radical socialist?
They willfully misinterpreted a small majority for Joe Biden as a mandate for presidential and legislative activism on an historic scale. They took a country at the end of its mental tether, exhausted by a pandemic and bitter partisanship, and using the time-honoured tactic of never letting a crisis go to waste, sought to reshape it in the image of their own extremist ideals.
I'll be reaffirming the federal government's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Bowing to a fundamentalist lunacy that walls are somehow immoral, that America owes the world a home and a living, they opened the border, unleashing socially and economically destabilizing forces that will take decades to repair.
As your president, I will protect our nation's sovereignty, secure our border.
This mess that we're seeing today, she created. She can't just come down here and take, 20 minutes and take a picture.
They propagated anti-scientific nonsense about gender.
Access to gender-affirming care is essential to the mental health and well-being of trans youth.
And anti-historical nonsense about race that have inflicted new wounds on our social fabric and reopened old scars.
The likelihood there's going to be the Taliban overrunning everything and owning the whole country is highly unlikely.
They brought shame on America's reputation and critically undermined our strength by executing a disastrous surrender to the enemy in Afghanistan and thereby emboldening far larger foes in Europe and the Middle East.
We strongly prefer that Russia choose the path of diplomacy and dialogue, but if it does not, we are fully prepared for the alternative.
Their zealotry helped turn the president who'd left office under a cloud of shame into a figure of some pity.
These are Democrats that definitely hate me.
With an excessively vengeful campaign of criminal and civil litigation aimed not only at harming his political and business prospects, but at sending him to prison for the rest of his life.
These are felony crimes in New York State, no matter who you are.
A campaign that backfired spectacularly and damaged trust in the idea of an independent judiciary.
You hear underneath all these questions the question of mission creep. Has 6312 morphed into something that it was not meant to do?
They deceived the country for 3.5 years about the fitness for office of the cognitively failing president.
Look,
when the truth about Mr. Biden's health was finally exposed, they thought they could simply swap him out for someone who hadn't been tested in electoral competition. Anyone questioning her credentials and abilities was denounced as racist or sexist. And so now their plan is to have the voters bail them out of all this misgovernance by insisting the only alternative is totalitarian terror.
We have the ability to turn the page.
Are we really ready to make that bargain?